In every family, there's a person who holds the pieces together. The one who remembers the birthdays, schedules the doctor's appointments, and knows exactly how to mediate the argument between a stubborn father and a hot-headed son. For the last 10 years, since my mom passed, that person has been me. I am the family glue. I fill the cracks nobody else sees, doing the invisible work that makes our lives appear seamless. It's a thankless job, but I've always told myself, it's my job to do. My brother Liam is busy with his career, and my sister Chloe has her own young family. That leaves me, the unmarried, flexible daughter, to be the default everything. This weekend is my dad's 60th birthday, and for the last 3 months, my life has been a whirlwind of planning the perfect surprise party. I've coordinated with over 50 guests, booked a venue, hired a caterer, and curated a slideshow of his life that took me weeks to assemble. My family's contribution to this effort exists in a group chat I created, a digital graveyard of my unanswered questions. Does anyone know Dad's favorite song from college? Sent 3 weeks ago. No replies. Can someone please call Aunt Carol to confirm her flight details? Sent last Tuesday. Still waiting. Yet, I get texts from them with casual demands. Make sure they have that craft beer Dad likes, Liam texted yesterday. Don't forget the gluten-free option for my kids, Chloe added. No, please. No, thank you. Just the quiet expectation that I will execute their wishes. I'm running on fumes, fueled by a dwindling sense of duty and a secret, foolish hope that this time it will be different. Maybe this time, when my dad sees the perfect party, the smiling faces of his friends, the love I poured into every single detail, he will finally see me. He'll see the effort, the sacrifice, the love. He'll look at me and offer the 2 words I've been craving for a decade. Thank you. I know it's a long shot. For a man who has never once acknowledged the clean laundry that appears in his drawers or the fully stocked fridge, acknowledging the mountain I've moved for him seems impossible, but still, a part of me hopes. This dynamic, this unspoken agreement that my time and energy are a communal resource, wasn't born overnight. It was forged in the fire of grief, the year my mother died. I was 19. Liam had just moved out, and Chloe was away at college. One day, I was just a daughter, and the next, I was the default matriarch of a broken family. While my father and siblings were allowed to collapse into their sorrow, I was the one who had to stay standing. I was the one fielding calls from the funeral home, making endless pots of coffee for grieving relatives, and ensuring there were tissues in every room. I remember standing in the kitchen at 3 a.m., listening to the quiet sobs from the living room, and realizing that no one had asked me if I was okay. Not once. My grief was an indulgence we couldn't afford. My utility was all that mattered. People would pat my arm and say, "You're so strong, Maya." But what they meant was, "Thank you for not falling apart so we can." My father, lost in his own pain, simply accepted my new role. He never had to learn how to run the house, because I was already doing it. He never had to remember to pay the electric bill, because I set up auto pay. He never had to worry about what to eat for dinner, because I made sure the fridge was stocked. My efforts became the invisible scaffolding that held his life together, and over the years, he stopped seeing the structure and only saw the comfort it provided. A few years ago, he had a health scare. It was a terrifying week of tests and uncertainty. I was the one who spent hours on the phone with insurance companies, the one who drove him to every appointment, holding his hand in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Liam was swamped with a can't-miss project at work, and Chloe's kids had the flu. I took a week off from my own job, unpaid, to be there. When the doctor finally gave us the all-clear, a wave of relief so profound it made me dizzy-washed. Over me. On the car ride home, my dad was silent. I thought he was processing the good news. Then, he cleared his throat and said, "Did you remember to use the parking validation? That garage is a ripoff." There was no, "Thank you for being there for me." No, "I couldn't have done this without you." Just a complaint about the parking fee. It was as if my week of panic, my lost wages, my emotional labor were completely invisible. He simply expected me to be there, and I was. The transaction was complete. It was then I realized he doesn't see my sacrifices as acts of love. He sees them as services rendered. And that quiet, crushing realization has been my constant companion ever since. The day of the party arrived in a blur of last-minute logistics. I was at the venue by noon, dealing with a florist who had delivered the wrong centerpieces and a sound system that kept crackling. My phone was a constant barrage of texts from guests asking for directions, all of which were clearly printed on the invitation I had designed. I was running on coffee and adrenaline, a familiar cocktail that had fueled me through a decade of family crises. By 6:30 p.m., everything was, against all odds, perfect. The lights were dimmed, the band was warming up, and the room looked beautiful. I allowed myself a fleeting moment of pride, a fragile hope that this grand gesture would finally be enough. Then, my family arrived, not to help, but to inspect. Chloe immediately frowned at the seating chart. "You put Aunt Carol next to the speakers? You know she complains about everything." Liam surveyed the bar. "Did you remember to get the single malt scotch I mentioned?" My dad walked through the room with a look of detached appraisal, as if he were judging a home renovation. He didn't see the love, the sleepless nights, the sheer force of will that had pulled this all together. He saw a product. He pulled me aside, away from the early arriving guests. I braced myself for a minor complaint, another last-minute request. But what he said next was the one thing I could never have anticipated. He gestured vaguely at the room, his expression not one of gratitude, but of mild irritation. "You know, Maya," he said, his voice low, "this is all a lot. I have to say, it feels less like a party for me and more like the Maya show. You always have to be in control of everything, don't you? It must be exhausting." And just like that, the world stopped spinning. It wasn't the complaint that broke me, it was the accusation. He had taken my greatest act of love, the culmination of months of selfless effort, and twisted it into a character flaw. My care was control. My diligence was a desperate need to be the center of attention. All the years I had spent quietly, holding his life together, making things easier for him, were reframed in an instant as a selfish power trip. The fragile hope I had harbored shattered into a million pieces. In its place, something new and terrifyingly calm settled in my chest. It was the sound of a cord snapping, the endless buzzing in my head, the mental to-do lists, the constant worry. It all just went silent. I looked at his face, at the faces of my siblings who were now looking on with passive agreement, and I saw them clearly for the first time. They didn't see me at all. They saw a function, a tool that had suddenly become inconvenient. The epiphany was so brutal and so liberating, it almost made me laugh. I wasn't the glue. I was the maid, the secretary, the manager, and I was done. I looked back at my father, a small, sad smile on my lips. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You're right." I picked up my purse from the table. "You're in control now." And I walked out the door. I drove for an hour with no destination in mind, the sounds of the city blurring into a meaningless hum. I found a small, anonymous hotel, paid for a room in cash, and walked into the profound, beautiful silence. The first thing I did was turn off my phone. The urge to see the fallout, to read the angry texts, was a siren song I had to resist. For the first time in a decade, I was responsible for no one but myself. I took the longest, hottest shower of my life, letting the steam wash away the feeling of thankless obligation. I didn't need to be at the party to know what was happening. I had spent my entire adult life studying the mechanics of my family, and I could picture their helplessness with perfect, crystalline clarity. I knew the chaos would have started small. A guest would ask my dad where to put a gift, and he'd look around with a vacant expression, having no idea I had set up a specific table for it. The band, whose schedule and playlist I had meticulously memorized, would finish their first set and look to him for direction, receiving only a confused shrug in return. The caterer, a woman named Susan whose number was saved only in my phone, would need to know when to cut the cake I had ordered. My dad wouldn't even know what flavor it was. The slideshow, my carefully curated journey of his life set to his favorite music, would never play. The laptop, the projector, the cables, They were a puzzle my father and siblings were utterly unequipped to solve. His moment in the spotlight, the one I had built for him, would be a mess of awkward silences and logistical failures. I could picture Liam, his face turning red with frustration. He'd be the first to get angry, pacing the floor, stabbing at his phone. His calls would go straight to my voicemail, each one becoming more aggressive than the last. "Maya, call me back now." Then, "Where the hell are you? You are ruining everything." He, who had contributed nothing but a request for expensive scotch, would feel utterly entitled to my labor and furious at its withdrawal. He wouldn't see the failure as his own inability to step up, but as my malicious act of sabotage. Chloe would be complaining to any guest who would listen, framing my absence as a personal attack on her. I just can't believe she'd be so selfish. My kids are exhausted and the gluten-free cupcakes are nowhere to be found. She would transform herself into the primary victim of the evening, blind to the irony that she was sitting in a room she hadn't lifted a single finger to secure. But the true betrayal, the one I felt in my bones even in the quiet of my hotel room, would be the narrative they would all agree upon. Trapped in their own incompetence, they would find unity in blaming me. To the confused guests, they would whisper that I was dramatic, unreliable, that I'd had some kind of breakdown. They wouldn't protect me. They would sacrifice my reputation to save their own pride. They would stand in the wreckage of a party they couldn't manage and unanimously declare that the architect was insane. This was their failure, their test. And I knew without a shadow of a doubt that they were failing spectacularly. I fell asleep that night feeling lighter than I had in years. The glue had dissolved. Now they would have to see if the pieces could hold on their own. The next morning, I woke up to the unfamiliar quiet of a room that wasn't mine. For the first time in years, I had slept through the night, a deep, uninterrupted slumber. There was no alarm set for my dad's medication, no mental checklist of chores to run through. There was just me. I ordered coffee and sat by the window, watching the city come to life, feeling a sense of detachment that was as terrifying as it was liberating. I knew I couldn't stay in this bubble forever. I needed to see the evidence. I needed the final confirmation that my epiphany wasn't just an emotional overreaction. With a steady hand, I turned my phone back on. It convulsed in my palm, a frantic spasm of notifications that lasted for nearly a full minute. 47 missed calls, 82 text messages, a dozen voicemails. I started with the texts. Liam's were a torrent of pure rage. Unbelievable. You are the most selfish person I have ever known. You completely humiliated Dad in front of everyone. Chloe's were dripping with passive-aggressive martyrdom. I hope you're proud of yourself. The kids were asking why Auntie Maya ruined Grandpa's party. Must be nice to just walk away from your responsibilities. Then I listened to the voicemails. My siblings' voices were just angrier versions of their texts, but my father's was the one that landed like a physical blow. His voice wasn't yelling. It was cold, clipped, and full of a chillingly calm disappointment. "Maya," his message began, "your little stunt last night was a masterclass in selfishness. You couldn't stand it not being about you for one night, so you manufactured a crisis to put yourself back in the center of it all. This family has given you everything, and you repay us with this drama. I have never been more ashamed. Don't even think about coming around here again until you are ready to apologize. Sincerely." That was the moment. The breaking point wasn't the party, or even his accusation. It was this voicemail. It was the complete clinical assassination of my character. It was the unanimous verdict from my entire family that I was the problem. Out. Of more than 100 messages, not a single one asked if I was okay. Not one suggested there might be a reason for my actions. They hadn't just failed the test of my absence. They had used it as an opportunity to solidify my role as the family villain. My quiet departure wasn't enough. I realized they would continue to spin this story, painting me as unstable and ungrateful to anyone who would listen. My silence would be treated as an admission of guilt. I couldn't just disappear. I had to go back. Not to fight, not to explain, and certainly not to apologize. I had to go back to look them in the eyes as I formally signed the death certificate of the family I once held together. I used my key to enter the house one last time. I found them in the living room, exactly as I knew I would, huddled together like conspirators amidst the wreckage of their own making. A few sad, deflated balloons clung to the corners of the room. My father, Liam, and Chloe were sitting in a tense silence, which my arrival shattered. My father stood up, his face a mask of thunderous disapproval. Liam shot up from his chair, pointing an accusing finger at me. "There she is. Do you have any idea what you did?" I ignored him. I walked calmly to the center of the room and looked at each of them. They expected tears, excuses, a desperate plea for forgiveness. I gave them a well-rested, quiet resolve that seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. "I got all of your messages," I began, my voice even and steady. "And I am not here to apologize." My father started to speak. "Of all the selfish, entitled—" "I'm not finished," I said, not loudly, but with a firmness that silenced him. "For 10 years, I have been the emotional, logistical, and domestic manager of this family. I did it out of love, and I did it willingly. But I see now that you didn't perceive it as love. You saw it as my duty. Yesterday, you called my care control. You called my sacrifice selfishness. You stood in a room that only existed because of my labor and accused me of making it all about myself." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You're right about one thing. It is exhausting. And I'm done." I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is a list," I said, placing it on the coffee table. "On it, you will find all the things I normally handle. Dad, your heart medication needs to be refilled on Friday. The prescription number is there. Liam, the quarterly taxes on the house are due in 2 weeks. The accountant's contact info is at the bottom. Chloe, I canceled my credit card, so the family streaming accounts and grocery delivery service will stop working tomorrow. You'll have to set them up yourself. The plumber is scheduled for Tuesday to fix the garbage disposal. His name is Mike." They stared at the list as if it were a bomb. The color was draining from their faces, replaced by a dawning, panicked confusion. This was a language of responsibility they didn't speak. "The Maya show is officially over," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "The lead actress has quit. The producer is gone. The stage manager has walked away. You are now in control." I took the house key off my keychain and placed it gently on top of the list. "I won't be needing this anymore." I turned and walked toward the door, their stunned silence following me. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't in shouting them down. It was in the quiet, terrifying sound of their world finally grinding to a halt. 6 months have passed since I placed my key on that table. 6 months since I changed my number and began the quiet, joyful work of building a life that belongs only to me. My new apartment is small, but it's full of light, and for the first time, it's truly mine. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety that was the soundtrack to my life is gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I've reconnected with friends I'd let drift away. I'm taking a pottery class just because it feels good to create something with my hands, and I received a promotion at work. It turns out, when you're not spending half your brain power managing 3 other adults, you have a lot left over for yourself. I didn't seek out news of them, but it found me last week in a phone call from my Aunt Carol. She had gotten my new number from a cousin and called, not to preach reconciliation, but to complain. The sound of her venting was the most satisfying epilogue I could have ever imagined. She said the family home was a disaster. My father had apparently missed a tax payment, incurring a heavy penalty, and had let his prescriptions lapse twice, resulting in a health scare that landed him in urgent care. The burden of his care had fallen, as I knew it would, onto Liam and Chloe, and the pressure had shattered their complacent alliance. They were fighting constantly. Liam was furious that Chloe's responsibilities with her own kids meant she wasn't available enough for Dad. Chloe was resentful that Liam, with his important career, thought writing a check was the same as spending hours in a doctor's waiting room. The invisible work I had done for a decade had suddenly become visible, and the weight of it was crushing them. They didn't just miss my labor, they missed the buffer I provided between them. The family glue was gone, and the pieces were not just falling apart, they were actively repelling each other. My value was never going to be proven by a thank you. It was proven in the chaos they created for themselves the moment I stopped cleaning up their messes. My story is for anyone who has ever felt invisible, for every person who holds their family, their workplace, or their friendships together with the thankless, unseen labor of love. Please know that your work is not insignificant, and your well-being matters more. You are allowed to stop holding it all together. You are allowed to choose yourself. If you have a story about finding your strength by letting go, I invite you to share it in the comments. Let's create a space where the invisible are finally seen.